Okay, good morning and welcome to this wonderful session. And we are going to deal today with rare books. And this reminds me when I used to be in the secret archives of Vatican in Rome, and I used to conduct my research on very old books. And I don't know if you have any opportunity to just take an old book and smell it. Have you ever tried that? You smell centuries. You smell centuries, because I'm talking about books from the 11th, 12th century, okay? And they are there, they have been there for many, many years, yes, you remember the movie The Name of the Rose? The Name of the Rose, where you have Syed. Here you are. Good morning, Syed. Come here, please. So I was just talking about The Name of the Rose, and it was in the same context where you are in the big library, and silence. There, what you have is some monks, priests, and that's it, and silence. And you dialogue with centuries. 11th, 12th, 13th century. Now I'm going to just yield my word to my dear friend Syed, because he's going to have the pleasure to introduce Mr. Collins.
Yes, thank you. I'm Syed Hassan, as you all know me. My wife Farouk. Glad that you are all here. We see a good house full here today. Wonderful. Thank you for being here. I think the good weather has prompted us to get out. Thank you, Finch, for being here. I appreciate your accepting our invitation and being here.
Thank you for a very generous invitation.
Linda Hall is always known to be the world leader, perhaps, in science and technology collection, and your rare book is always the gem of it, so we would like to hear about it, and thanks for being here.
Very sweet. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Hassan, for a very generous introduction. My name is Finch Collins. I am the Assistant Curator of Rare Books at Linda Hall Library, and I'll be speaking with you all today about a variety of topics. In preparing for this, was a little worried I wouldn't have enough to say. I then finished my presentation and realized I had 40 slides. So I invite you to stop me, ask questions. You're also welcome to hold more extensive questions to the end. But I'll be going through a bit about the history of Linda Hall Library, and then where we find ourselves at the present in respect to rare books, to the history of science, and to the landscape of libraries and science information more generally. And with that, I will get a roll on it. So I see many familiar faces in this room, so I already know a bit of the answer to this question. How many of you have been to Linda Hall Library? Oh, beautiful. Okay, usually when I ask high schoolers this, they're like, I've never stepped foot in the library. Well, how many of you have been in the last, let's say, 5 or 10 years? Okay. The question that I have beyond that is, who thinks they were at the library like longest ago? Does any of you you're like, oh, I was there when I studied at UMKC in the 80s, in the 70s, I'm curious who thinks they have the oldest year.
Get a door prize.
Wow, okay, 40, so that's I'm a little younger than that. So I don't remember seeing you there, but I believe you. All right, cool. Well, a lot has stayed the same in that interval. The building looks very much the same, though it has been expanded a couple times. And our collections have continued to grow, but are still rooted in the same things that they were 40 or 50 years ago, which is science, engineering, technology, and their histories. This is our main reading room, which you all have seen. It's a gorgeous space, and this is what the facade looks like. Although I put these in to orient for people that have never been, and I don't even need to do that. So general collection strengths, we focus on engineering and technology, chemistry, physics, research journals, and we have especially strong, libraries tend to, especially research libraries like Linda Hall, tend to collect not necessarily for their immediate area in the way that a public library or a university library collects for the university community, but we tend to collect in a way that we are the one library that has that niche, and other libraries can then rely on us. So some of the things that we are strongest in the US context are Cyrillic and Eastern European serials. We fulfill a large number of interlibrary loan requests and digitization requests for serials that are not written in English, French, Spanish, German, etc. We also have a massive collection of archival engineering specifications and, why am I blanking on the name for it? Building codes and standards. They are standards. In many cases, we are the only holding library that has, for example, the 1962 specification on pipe welding. And then that becomes really useful if a lawyer is looking to see whether or not this pipe that was welded in 1964 was up to code, that exploded. We also have, as I mentioned, at-risk or infrequently held serials. Some of these have been the focus of digitization projects where we aim to scan these so that we can share them with a much broader community. Often, if they're infrequently held or at risk, the physical material is degrading in a way that cannot be conserved or turned around. And we also collect academic and scholarly society publications. We collect a lot of things that are published, that are printed, but that are not published through traditional channels in the way that an academic book would be published. And so often those materials get missed by libraries. The history of science strengths include early printed science, early scientific periodicals. If you're looking for philosophical transactions, the beginning issues of philosophical transactions, great news, we have 4 sets. So you can come and take your pick of whichever of the copies you'd like. And we collect on the history of everything mentioned in the general collection strengths, as well as astronomy. One of our biggest strengths is European astronomy up to about 1800. Botany, mathematics, geology, and then other engineering disciplines, railroads, mining, etc. And here you see a photo of some of the gems in our collection. Got some beautiful bird books in the background, and I know this book pretty much cover to cover. This is Solarius's, published by the same people that did Flau. Harmonia Macrocosmia, which is actually on display at the Nelson Atkins at present. The history of science collection spans from 1472, our oldest books are from 1472, to the present. It's about 50,000 books. And books here does not, the reason I say about 50,000 is that some of you have worked with books printed in this time period with early books. Often they'll put multiple books in one physical book, or alternately, one book is a 6-volume set. So it can be a little tough to say how many books we have exactly, but we have about 50,000 individual volumes, which compose roughly 50,000 works, if you take into account that some of those volumes are 6 works and some of those works are 6 volumes. All areas, history of science, as I already said. And these are some highlights from our collection. The numbers, these are a little bit out of date, but we have 42 miles of shelves in 82 languages. Yeah, that's 42 miles of shelves just in that building. We don't have anything off-site. It's just whoop, 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 back and forth the whole time. Monographs, we're approaching 500,000 monographs. Serials, we maintain over 40,000 titles. And within those titles, the issues are, at this point, probably closer to 550,000. And we maintain many active subscriptions. We also have standards, GovDocs, tech reports, and conference proceedings, over 300,000. Total volumes, we're climbing toward about 1.5 million volumes. Rare books, again, 50,000 items.
Question.
Yes?
So back in the 90s, it was great because I was having to look up something that I needed for my research, and you had a volume of some chemistry title that gave me the answer I needed. And so I'm curious, if I were to go there today, could I still find that volume? I mean, it was like from the 30s, I think.
You could.
Would it be on the shelves, or would it be, I mean, I'm just thinking of the space and.
Yes, so what you're seeing, actually, I'm going to zoom back a few slides to get this photo. So what you see here on the first floor is our reference collection for the most part, and then on the second floor we have what we call open stacks. If the volume is from about the 1980s, 90s, or newer, it usually lives on the open stack. Those are open because patrons can go up and take a book off the shelf and check them out. The rest of the material, though, when it ages out of open stacks, goes to closed stacks. Closed here does not denote that you cannot access it, but simply that a staff member will have to page it for you. But all of those materials are still, you just put in a request in the online catalog, any of the reference staff can help you figure out exactly what you need, and then the book comes up in usually about 15 minutes, 10 or 15 minutes, depending on how busy they are. Unlike public libraries or some university libraries, we very, very rarely get rid of anything. The only times that we get rid of something are if we have a duplicate of it, so if we've acquired one that's in better condition, we may get rid of the older one. But you know, we don't discard something just because no one is using it anymore. Part of our purpose as an independent research library is to be the archive. So when I speak about rare books, I'll talk a little bit about what qualifies something for my area of the library, for the history of science collection, but it's a very fluid boundary between the two, and often there are materials that people are very surprised that you can just come and consult in the reading room, because they're like, you're the only library that holds this journal. It's a, you know, Cyrillic periodical on nuclear engineering from the 1930s. You're the only place in the States that holds it, and you're telling me I can just come look at it? It's like, yeah. I mean, do tell us if it's the only one, because we might move it into history of science, but it's probably in your interest to not tell us, because, you know, then you have to go through me to get to it. I'm very nice that I let them get stuff. Yeah.
So I'm curious, with all of this physical product sitting in this space, is any of it being digitized?
Yes.
As we are moving forward in the future, everything, you know, and also look from the maintenance aspect, when you have an accident, something happens,
Yes.
and destruction of such properties.
Yes, we are, and I will get to that.
Okay,
Yes.
sorry.
No,
Didn't
you
mean
were
to jump
more
ahead of
than
you.
good. You were more than good. I'm glad to, I appreciate questions because it helps me see what I should make sure to focus on. History of science strengths, collection overview. So, backing up a bit, part of my prompt is the history of Linda Hall Library. You all know it. Why is it in Kansas City? Why does it focus on science, engineering, and technology? Why is it called Linda Hall? A very odd name for a library. The story of Linda Hall Library begins in the 1940s with Linda Hall, Linda Suttle Hall, and Herbert Hall, who were a wealthy, high society couple in Kansas City. Mr. Hall was a grain merchant. He founded the grains export company that had merged with a couple others, and by 1900 he was sitting pretty. He was very wealthy and a prominent member of Kansas City society. Herbert and Linda did not have children or direct descendants, though they did have a large array of bourgeois dogs that we have many photos of, which are they're very fun. And when they died, they left in their will $6 million to a board of trustees, and they said, please use this gift, this trust, to found a library for the betterment of Kansas City. And so that was 1941 when Herbert died, and so the board of trustees met over the course of 5 years with members of the library community across the country, with members of Kansas City industry and government, to decide what a library for the benefit of Kansas City would look like. I mean, the public library already existed, so what is the niche that we can use this for? And they decided in the 1940s on a library of science and technology that would, in their mind, and I think quite successfully, drive innovation and business to Kansas City that had excellent effects for 30 years, 40 years, and to this day. We are a resource for the Kansas City community broadly. The library at first, though, did not have the physical building that you all have been in. At first, it was in a hall home. This is what their house looked like. Their house, the grounds of Linda Hall Library, the 14 acres, were the grounds that their house were on. That's why we exist where we are. It's a bit of a strange location, especially now that UMKC has grown around us. And this was their beautiful Georgian-style mansion. And for the first 10 years of the library's existence, the library operated out of the Hall home. And actually, I'm going to jump back. This image here, you can see in the background, that's the portrait of Linda that I showed in greater detail. And this is the reading room operating in about 1952 in their home. And here we see young people, students, consulting materials that I'm like, I think I recognize that one. That's a periodical I've seen before. And it was only then in, this picture was taken somewhere between the 1956 and 1964, and this shows the main building of Linda Hall Library, which today is still the solid bulwark next to the Hall home. So they built the library next to the home, and in this time period in the 50s, the History of Science collection and the reading room, this library was mostly functioning as a storage place. The reading room was still in the Hall home, and so staff would have to carry materials back and forth outside through this little gap that we still call the breezeway, though now it's covered, don't worry. And the Hall home is on the site where now the History of Science building is. Here again, this is another photo of that same room from the 50s. You can see all the files, card catalogs, serials, periodicals. And you can see at the top here, there's some stained glass, some mosaics. Those are the same ones that are now on the outside of the History of Science reading room. There's, if you look up when you're next down in the History of Science wing, there's clear glass windows, and then at the top, they've preserved those aspects from the Hall home. The History of Science collection began as part of this. You know, if you're looking to build a library of science and technology for the benefit of industry, why have a History of Science collection other than it's cool? The formation of the History of Science collection was in large part from the first director, Joseph Shipman. Here he is. I will say this is not professional best practice. We do not smoke pipes on top of, I'm pretty sure that's the Solarius. I'm pretty sure that's the beautiful full color volume I pointed out earlier. We certainly do not smoke them next to the celestial globe. I don't know what these. The 50s were a different time in terms of library practice. We have a lot of photos of Joe Shipman and other library staff with like cup of wine in one hand, pipe in the other, like invaluable book in front of them. I can't even have water at my desk. But Joseph Shipman, one of the first things he did as library director in 1945 was he acquired the library of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences that formed the seed of the collection. We have many books from the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and because the AAAS, as we call it, had been founded pre-revolution, it had acquired many books that, you know, at the time were bought new, and now we're 150 years old, we're 200 years old, and we're significant in the history of science. Things like a first edition of Isaac Newton's Principia, for example, which now fetch prices much beyond what they would have paid at the time. This is the first board of trustees. You can see them in front of the old card catalog. I will say the card catalog is no longer in a place where you can see it publicly, but we do still have it. And this table we also still have, though it's not used for paper call slips anymore. We've modernized. We've gone a little bit more digital than that. And here you see the reading room when it was first constructed. This is the main area. So that bank of windows still exists, but a renovation pushed it another, say, 30 feet back. So this is the reading room now is kind of a cross shape. This is the first instantiation of that, which is a T. So they extended that little point a bit later. I love this. It's very, very of its time in a nice way. And the Rare Book Room then was part of that. This is actually from the Kansas City Times, 1973. With a great photo of Joe Shipman, again with a pipe on the top of the Rare Book, and that portrait of Herbert Hall in, this is no longer the Rare Book Room, called the Spencer Room, because this was not high security enough or big enough. But you can see that the rare books went from 100, 200 or so, to, at this time, full article has the number, it says about 5,000. So in the 70s, we're looking at about 5,000 volumes in the rare book collection, which would have fit comfortably in just a couple rooms. So that's a little bit about the history of Linda Hall Library and the rare book collection. I alluded to this a bit previously. Also, I think some of you may have heard my spiel on this before, so I'll breeze through it. But the question of what makes a book rare, why is something in the general collection where you could check it out and use it in the main reading room versus in the rare book collection? And especially at Linda Hall, it's quite fluid. I often will be reading a bookseller's catalog, will see a book that I think that is an excellent fit for Linda Hall Library. We should have it. It costs, let's say, $10,000, which in the scheme of rare books is a good sum, but we've that's sort of mid-range for the stuff that we buy. And I'll say, okay, $10,000. Let me check if we have it first. You don't want to spend $10,000 on a book you already have. And I look and I see that we do have a copy, and it's in closed stacks. And I say, okay, I'm going to just take a little trip down to closed stacks. I'm going to pull that off the shelf, and I'm going to put that in the rare book room before someone else sees that this book is retailing for $10,000 and decides to go and check it out themselves. Do as I say, not as I do. So we have 4 criteria for what constitutes a rare book for Linda Hall. And I'll say every institution does this a little bit differently. The most obvious, perhaps, is value. That can be monetary value, most often it is, or it can be value in a more intangible sense. If something is unique and its uniqueness is valuable in a way, archivists have a term of enduring value that is useful here. So, there are many, many artifacts in the world that are unique. They have someone's handwriting on them. They have a name in them. They've been modified in some way. If we tried to collect every object that's unique, we would run out of shelf space in about 3 days. So value here, monetary value again, is perhaps the most significant. I mentioned Newton's first edition of the Principia. It's Latin, you read it backwards, Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy. We have 2 copies of this first edition of the foundational work in physics. And these live in the rare book collection because a copy of this book sells on the market for a lot of money. Scarcity is another consideration. This is a Japanese book called, double check before Shoseki Saizoben, which is on saltpeter manufacturing. It's from 1854, and it was not very expensive, but there are only 2 other copies that we know of in the world. And so, in the interest of preservation, it lives in the rare book collection. Another is security. This is related to value. This is a paper that some of you might recognize. And this is, oftentimes you'll see in the catalog, there'll be a holdings record for a serial that looks very weird, because it'll say something like, Volume 1 through Volume 5, Rare Book Room. Volume 5 through Volume 152, General Collection. Volume 153, Rare Book Room. 154 to present, General Collection. You're like, what? Did someone do it wrong? Often what happens is there is an article in that is a significant theft risk. The market has changed a bit. People are less eager to buy single articles that have been clearly ripped out of larger volumes, but it is still a risk that someone, if this was in the general collection, someone would come in with a little pocket knife, take it out in the main reading room, and just go whoop, and put it in their pocket and walk out with an article that would retail for several $1,000s. And also, we like having a copy, so please don't take it. And that's why it lives in the History of Science collection. Yes?
How many times those kind of incidents have happened in your library?
At our library? None to my knowledge. Do you have you done something? No. But it's happened to enough other libraries that we try to keep it. Sometimes a good offense is the best defense in this case, or a good defense is the best offense. We have had a few incidences where materials have gone missing from the general collection that we then learned, 100 years later, not 100 years later, 50 years later, we were like, wait a second, that's now really rare. I can think of a couple off the top of my head. But a few books out of 1.5 million volumes is about what you'd expect. So, but we do see, rare book theft is lucrative, so people still do it, and we try and take security measures so they don't. The last of the criteria for inclusion in the History of Science collection is condition. In the History of Science reading room, we have the supports and the staff to help patrons handle materials in a way that supports their ongoing preservation. This is a book that I would use the technical term yucky for. It's not in good shape. And this is a first edition of what sounds very boring, but I promise is interesting, of the Boiler and Pressure Vessel Code. Linda Hall Library holds a full run of the Boiler and Pressure Vessel Code. We are very, very rare in this, and this is a book that is quite expensive now because of its scarcity. This is the code that governs everything from the boiler in your house to submarines and spacecraft. And so it is very important, and we keep the first few ones in the History of Science collection because they're in such a condition that rough handling would degrade them much further. These are also, I will add, these are one of the earliest things that Linda Hall Library digitized, although at that time digitization meant making microform scans. So, it's sort of a proto-digitization.
You can see the
It's a start, yes.
You can see the year on the, can you read that?
This is the edition of 1914.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
yes, of course. I'm also happy to, I will send this presentation around, and I'm happy to, if there are anything that I have not thoroughly cited, I'm happy to identify what material it's from if you're interested in consulting it. These are the two areas where History of Science books are kept. We have the vault over in the back and the cage. Between the two of them, again, about 50,000. This is a little, you can see this publicly. This is a bit of a backstage view to the cage. I will say the vault is certainly prettier, and that's why that's the public-facing one. So, in the time I have remaining, I'd like to speak a bit about how we steward the collection and how we share the collection. We'll get to digitization, we'll get to a bit more of, this collection was founded, there's the halls, there's the History of Science and Technology, you've acquired some libraries. What's it all for? And in my mind, the answer to what's a library collection for is sharing it back out. We steward this collection, we take actions to make it accessible to people, whether that's cataloging or talks like this, or exhibitions, or public programs, and all of that is based on getting the collection materials back out into the community. So, maybe surprising to people that haven't worked in libraries, but cataloging and recataloging is an ongoing process. So we have books that I will say the impolite term in the industry is backlog. The polite term might be unprocessed materials or excess or overflow. Our uncatalogued materials, though, thankfully very small. We've made a lot of progress on it, but it's not uncommon in libraries for materials to come in, and then there's not the staff time or resources to process those collections and to make them accessible again. The biggest example of this is the Engineering Society Library, which we acquired in full in 1995. That library was, we got it for free, but we had to pay for transportation. Transportation was 18 18-wheelers full of books. So we're justified in still working on it. I mean, it's a lot of stuff. It's a lot of stuff. And many of the materials are, the engineering societies decided to sell their library or to donate their library to us in part because they had not been in a situation where they could preserve their library for about 20 or 30 years. Which meant that the library and the materials, many of which are 19th century or early 20th century and have acidic paper and have other conservation concerns, those materials were sitting in a New York City skyscraper without climate control for a large bulk of their life. So they often look like this, which then gets all over my desk. And Yes, I could talk at great length about the Engineering Society's library. But this is a little bit of what that still looks like. So some of our work is still processing these collections. Also, library cataloging standards have changed over time. Materials that were ingested into the library in the 1950s often have records that are condensed enough to fit onto a card catalog card. And now that we have, that storage is freer, we can expand those records, but that requires staff time and expertise to go back through again and say, this just says, you know, one book, 386 pages, topic science. Is that actually useful to people? Let's go through and add, say, this is about science in Latin America in the 1500s. Let's go through and say that it has illustrations. Let's go through and say that this may be of an appropriate reading level for high school students. Let's go through and add stuff that was not standard at that time. Here's more of the Engineering Society library. A nightmare, truly. So in addition to stewarding the collection by taking care of the materials we already have, we, especially in the history of science, acquire new materials. We select new materials based on our collection development policy, based on historic strengths, building on those strengths, and on new areas of focus. Often those new areas of focus are motivated by what we think researchers are looking for and what we often librarians try to work a bit ahead of researchers. We want to think, what are researchers going to be looking for in 10 years, in 15 years, in 50 years? What are interesting materials that we can care for, describe, and steward now, so that when researchers come looking, we have them. There's also a few other factors
But
that, yes.
I expect that the researchers coming to you and saying, do you have this?
Yes, that's also a factor. I mean, a large part of my job is we have a large research fellowship program, and I often learn about things that I did not know about in the history of science from those fellows. And they say, oh, you know, I'm working on the history of electricity in Latin America in the 1930s. I'm like, I know nothing about that. Tell me more. Tell me what sort of sources you use. Tell me what sort of pamphlets and materials I can look out for that you haven't been able to find anywhere. Yes?
How is the library managing its relationship today to AI?
Big question. I think we've been fortunate that it's not been forced on us quite yet. I think that, you know, machine learning and computerization, they offer a lot of really outstanding benefits, especially for a text collection. I think the general sense within librarianship is this technology is cool, but who's in control of it, or who has, you know, as in our field, information is never neutral. So who is the person, who's controlling the code that goes into that box? So I think there's a lot of really exciting possibilities, but librarians tend to be a bit, part of our job and part of our professional ethics is to present correct information, which I'd say current AI tends to have about a 70% rate of doing, and we pride ourselves on being more like 99% or 100%. So I see a lot of exciting possibilities for it, but so far it's been, it remains sort of exploratory within the library. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, have fun.
Yeah, no, I know, truly. Yeah. Whew. Here's an example, though, of building on existing strengths and new areas of focus. So this is a pretty famous image. Some of you may have seen it. This is Robert Hooke's Micrographia, The Flea, 1660s. This is Robert Hooke, an early member of the Royal Society in London, pointing his, I'll say, very basic telescope or microscope. It's essentially a tin can with a lens that he ground on one end, and producing these illustrations of microscopic creatures from hair. This is the book that coins the word cell to refer to plant cells, because he looks at cork under a microscope and says it looks like the cells in which monks are working. And he says, I will call these cells, and the name has stuck. And here we see a more recent acquisition. This is a book on microscopy for a more general audience that is written by a woman named Mary Ward, who in the 1850s was a pioneer in science writing and scientific exploration, but in a way that women could do. So this was, not that they couldn't do this, but they could publish this. And so this is a really early and beautiful example of women engaging with science in a way that they were socially allowed to in the 1850s. And we acquired this, I believe, from the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. If not, we bought it in the 50s. And this we bought just last year. So we're continuing to expand. And I'm fortunate that my predecessors in the History of Science collection did a very thorough job at collecting the greatest hits, let's say. So there are very few books that we are wanting for in terms of big names, in terms of first editions, though there are still holes that we're looking to fill. Here's some ways that books enter the library. One of them, this is blurry, don't worry about reading it, is a gift. So we accept gifts in kind. I will say there is a process, and we don't accept everything. Please don't drop your books off at the front desk and run away. I say please don't drop your books and run away because it happens regularly that someone comes in and is like, I have books for you. We're like, no, and then we're like, you need to transfer these. Like, one, do we even want these? Two, you need to sign over a thing that says I give these to the library so that you can't be like take back. So we accept a large number of gifts in kind, and actually this upcoming summer we're doing an exhibition highlighting new acquisitions in the History of Science collection and in the library more generally, and we'll be displaying a number of materials that we received as gifts in kind to the library. Another method that we, especially in History of Science, use is we purchase rare books from rare book dealers. So the secondhand book market goes all the way from the bargain bin at half-price books, up to Prosperos, up to we call mid-range market sellers, up to the very, very, very high end. And this is how, dealers is often how a book from the 1600s, from the 1700s has survived, is because it's passed between individual owners, including rare book dealers who sell it to the next person. And we are often the last stop, as it were. Institutions tend to be, unless an institution dissolves, institutions are the last stop for those materials. And they do dissolve. We have books that have nameplates of other institutions that no longer exist. Here's an example of a manuscript, so a handwritten American astronomical book. This was one of my supervisor, Jason Dean's, first purchases at the library. It's very cool. We also occasionally purchase books at auction. This, for example, is a copy of, you can see one of the reasons that we don't always purchase at auction is it can be we have to set a price for that, like how high we're willing to go, and often how high we're willing to go is going to be a lot more than the estimate. Christie's, especially, and Sotheby's love to say, oh, this is going to be like $2,000, it's fine, and then it goes for $20,000. I will say also one of the reasons we don't purchase at auction a lot is because we, as a library, an independent library, especially in the history of science, engineering, and technology, are bidding against people that have made careers and fortunes in those fields and have now turned to collecting books in that area, which, great for us, there has to be an ecosystem, but we're not going to beat Bill Gates at auction. It's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. These are some other considerations when purchasing books. How many exist? Who has copies and how accessible are they? Linda Hall prides ourselves on making materials accessible locally and internationally through digitization and through scans. And so if there's, say, 5 copies of a book known, but 3 of them are in private collecting hands, and one of them is in the Vatican, let's say, we would count that as a book that's not accessible to researchers. Sorry to the Vatican, but they are not very accessible to researchers. Is it priced reasonably? Booksellers will often be like, this book is worth $10,000, and then you look and see the last time that it sold, and it sold for $2,000, and you say, no, thank you. What is its custodial history? We want to make sure that we're buying books that don't have questionable provenance, for example. I will say one thing that always sets my alarm bells off is if I see a book that left Germany in the 1930s, I'm like, let's do a little work and see under what conditions this left the Berlin Library in 1938. Speaking of red flags, are there red flags on the book? In the description or with the seller. So we tend to buy from sellers that are members of the ABAA, which is the Antiquarian Booksellers Association of America. Part of the reason we do that is that if it's found that they have misdescribed the book, if the book is stolen, if the book is forged, we get our money back. And I think the ultimate question is, what will this copy contribute to our collections? Every day I see hundreds of interesting books, that some of which could fit in the Linda Hall collection, but as those of you that have ever worked with a budget know, you can't buy everything. And so we work to make selections that will, and that is essentially what the curator is trained to do, is making selections that will build the collection in productive and interesting ways. Yes?
Considering the fact that you started with 6 million
Yes.
real dollars at that time, what's your budget to be able to
Yeah.
purchase?
I can't give exact numbers, but I'll
No,
say that the
ballpark figure?
ballpark figure, for the rare books, we're looking in the, hundreds, thousands-ish, but not, I mean,
Not a million.
not, and there are easily books, we have the sort of budget that it would not be hard for us to spend the entire budget on one book. Or spend more, like, there are books that go on the market where we're like, well, that would be 4 years of our budget, and we just can't do that. The prices it's very much a logarithmic curve that, you have, it's like 5 to 500, 500 to 10,000, 10,000 to infinity, and I'm like, okay, let's stay in that lower end. But the overall operating budget has grown, has kept pace, let's say, with inflation. Yes?
Excuse me. When you say what will this copy contribute to our collection, do you project or try to review how many people will be interested in this book?
Yes. Yes, we try to, so we have some statistics that we maintain internally about what collections get used the most. It's a bit of a double-edged sword, though, because sometimes a collection gets used a lot because it's already well-developed and people know about it. And so maybe we don't need to acquire books in that area because it's good, it's working for people. Whereas a collection that is not getting as much use, perhaps it's because we're missing the text, and this will fill that hole. So we do take that into consideration, but not always as you might expect. Great. Here's an example of a book that we acquired pretty recently. For, let's say, the upper end of that price range that was discussed. This is our new copy. It's very blurry, but I can send a higher quality image of Galileo's 1610 Sidereus Nuncius, where he discovers for the first time celestial objects not known to the ancients, so planets beyond the classical. And this is also where he sets out, he's like, wow, Jupiter has moons. Interesting. I thought everything was supposed to orbit around the Earth. Huh. This is the start of his saga with the Catholic Church. And so we are very fortunate to have acquired a copy of it. A second copy, I should add. And a second copy that has a lot of interesting features that I will not talk your ear off about because I'm running up on time, but I will happily answer questions about. Last area, I'll breeze through this, how we share the collection. I don't want to skip out on this. So, fellows and visiting scholars. We host an extensive fellowship program for visiting researchers. For the most part, our visiting researchers are either PhD students or career researchers in the history of science. They work as far back as the 15th century and as recent as the 20th and 21st century. Having both the history of science collection and the general collection and having the two kind of flow into each other, especially in the 1800s and 1900s, means that fellows are often working between the two. I'd say about a third to half of the fellows down in the rare book reading room. The other fellows, though, are often working upstairs with our rare and unique collections that nonetheless don't have space in the history of science room. So, for example, they'll be working on Latin America is a great example because we have really extensive Latin American journal holdings. So they'll be working on Latin American food policy in the 1950s, and we're the only library that has particular government documents put out by Uruguay, let's say. Yes.
I see both researchers are wearing no protection.
No gloves. No gloves needed. That policy has changed a bit in the field over the last, I'd say about 30 years. It's certainly, well, not to brag, the change happened before I was born. But gloves and versus clean, recently washed hands both have advantages. One advantage of gloves is that you're not getting any oil on the paper. However, gloves deaden the sensation of your fingertips. So about 20 or 30 years ago, there was a movement in the field based on some studies that found that clean washed hands were actually less damaging to books because you're more likely to rip pages if you're wearing gloves. That is for printed books on paper, manuscripts, anything printed or written on vellum. Different story. This varies worldwide. There's different standards, but at present, you do not need to wear gloves to consult materials in the history of science collection. The only exception is anything that is metal, because you can, even just your clean washed hands will leave fingerprints that will corrode. So we have a few books that are bound in metal, and those need gloves. We have some books that have metallic clasps, and those need gloves. But for the most part, what you see here is standard. I'm going to...
Excuse me.
Yes.
Who compensates these fellows and these scholars?
Linda Hall Library
Linda.
does. Yes, so we have a foundation in addition to the trust, and fellowships are one of the main ways that we use that money and share our collections. And I'll say this is a program that started in about 2012. We started having a couple fellows and only really became a formalized and established program in, I think, 2017, 2018. And every year we've welcomed, we ramped up to where we are right now, and we're welcoming about, I'd say, 25 to 35 fellows each year who are paid on a monthly basis based on their status as either a graduate student or a postgraduate. And that money enables these researchers to come and stay in Kansas City and work with the collections. Yes?
How much of your collection is digitized and therefore searchable?
I will get to that.
Okay.
Yes, you're good. All right, class and group visits. You've done this. Next, research and scholarship. So in addition to visiting fellows, staff within the library are active in research and scholarship. It's not in the way that a traditional academic would be, but especially in the rare book collection, our job relies on specialized training, and our cataloging in particular often relies on, for example, identifying manuscript fragments that are bound within books. We have a lecture series called After Hours, where either we're a member of the curatorial staff in the rare books area, speaks with an outside expert on books in our collection. Those are all available on YouTube. And if there's any that you are interested in that are not on YouTube, let me know, and I will bully my colleague to put them up on YouTube, because I want them all there. We also do exhibitions. This is from last year's New Acquisitions show. The current exhibition, Life Beyond Earth, most of those materials are from the general collection, which I think highlights that the general collection is also in a way a sort of special and unique and rare collection. And that's mostly because the study of extraterrestrial life started more recently than materials in the history of science collection. Digitization, all right. So here is one of our lovely digitization staff, Mike, working on a scan of a book. We have an extensive digitization department. We have had one for about 25 years at this point. Originally it started to support exhibitions, so they'd be scanning like one image from a book. Since then it's evolved to scanning hundreds of thousands of pages every year. At present though, I mean, hundreds of thousands of pages every year, 25 years, 1.5 million volumes in the library. So we are a very developed unit. The people that do it have extensive expertise in the equipment, in the materials, and scan huge runs of journals to make them available online digitally. And those journals then are searchable. So we use OCR, optical character recognition, to make those journals searchable for people. We also digitize large swaths of the history of science collection. One of the first sort of mini collections that we did was all of our books that are printed in 1501 or earlier, our incunables. That number's in the 40s at present, and we've done more digitization work since. But I'd say, despite all of this work, for the History of Science vault, we're probably looking at less than 5% digitized, just because of how many pages are in each book.
What's your standard for digitization? Anyone that has their own home pictures and you make a scan, 300 dpi, 2400 dpi,
Yes.
10,000 dpi.
10,000. So yeah, we aim for about 300,000 DPI. No, we generally, that's industry best practice is we maintain master copies of all those scans that are at a very high resolution. I think it's at 72 DPI or something that where it's very readable. I can't remember the specific. I don't want to mislead. But then and they'll make, especially for images, they'll make scans of 300 or 600 DPI. But if you have an entire, let's say you have a 400-page book full of color images that you've scanned at 600 DPI, if you try to put that all into one PDF and one single file and then upload it, or if one of you tries to download it, I think your computer would explode. So.
Yes.
What you see on the website is a compressed version of those images, but something that we do fairly frequently and that I do fairly frequently is I request an image from digitization, from our DIU, Digital Initiatives Unit, where I say, I can see that you've scanned this book. Can I get the high resolution copy of PDF page 138, which I'll be using in an exhibition post that I'm making on social media? And they're like, yep. Cool.
Yeah.
So they do scan on request. There's a bit of a cost recovery fee if there's materials that are within copyright. There's also copyright consideration, so that at present is 1929 or later is going to be in copyright. But they work with, they are the experts on that, and they work with people extensively to get the materials that they need. And generally they turn stuff around within a couple weeks. So it's not instant, but especially if it's more complicated, it takes a little longer. Any other digitization questions? I want to respect y'all's time.
Accessibility, you said, digitization, does it require how you get into the system? Is it something you can just go online and there it is, you can get into the library stuff and see
Yes.
it?
So
And
all of
accessibility
our,
of the same kind, entering into the library, can Joe Public just come in?
yes, general public can come in. If you live in the Kansas City metro area, you can get a free library card that enables you to check materials out. If you don't live in the Kansas City metro area, you can still get a library card, but you just can't take materials home with you. And all of those digital scans are available linked through the library catalog. I can actually, after this, just show where those digital materials are. There's a way that you can consult everything that we've digitized, so you don't have to go searching for a book that has a digitization, that has a scan online, but all of those digital files are linked for the public. The one barrier you might encounter is if we've digitized something that is within copyright, which we will sometimes do, you'll have to create an account and log in, and then you virtually check out the book. That is to remain within copyright. It's a bit of a gray area, but we try and, as an institution, stay on the slightly lighter side of the line, and so we'll allow people to check out digitized versions of materials in copyright, and we then remove the physical copy from circulation. So it's one copy can only circulate, either digital or physical. That can be a bit of a barrier, but again, all those materials are free and available. For the History of Science collection, it's a little more involved to get in. You need an appointment, and that's because we're not checking, do you really need to be here? We're mostly confirming, because we need to staff that desk separately, and there's only so many staff members, and we have to pull all the books out for you, so we ask for about 48 hours advance notice. Business hours, mind you, if you email on Friday, I'm not going to see you until Monday. I'm the one who clears all those requests. And we also ask for a research purpose. Research purpose can be broad. I see high school students, for example, that are working on Euclid and want to come see first editions to ground what they're learning in class. I'm like, that's cool. Yeah, totally, come in. KCAI students will come in that are working on art projects and are looking for inspiration in the visual materials. more traditionally, a PhD student or an academic would come in to review materials for an article that they're working on. We had someone come in who was doing genealogy research and knew that we had maps of the exploration of the Missouri River and wanted to see how that worked. So we asked for a research purpose in part because if someone comes in and says, "Hello, I'd like to see your oldest and most expensive book," we need a little line of defense to be like, why? But I tend to be pretty flexible and lenient. We also share materials with the public through the Linda Hall Library blog, our news feed. I happen to have written like 3 of these, but staff members from across the library write them. This is all available for free on the website. And more, I'll say, one in Kansas City that you may not know. This is the parking garage at the main library, the main library branch. The spines, these titles are edited, where they've added in and they've made the titles, you know, Huckleberry Finn and Lord of the Rings. The spines, though, this is Gould's Birds of Europe. This is on mines. This is Chambers' Dictionary. This is Kepler on novas. This is Darwin. The books are from our collection. So the scans, those spines, and they actually came into the library in, it was about 2010, 2011, and physically rearranged the books in the order that they wanted, got the photos, got the high quality digitization scans made, and then turned those into these. So every time I walk by the main branch, I'm like, I think I've seen that book recently. And I have, it's in the vault. On that note, I've been fortunate to answer questions throughout, but I'd like to end here and address any further questions you all have. Thank you so much for your attention. All right.
Do you do interlibrary loan internationally, or do you have all the stuff that you have?
We do some international interlibrary loan. Are you referring to materials we send out or materials we
Or that
receive
you can
in?
get somebody wants something that you don't have probably, and
That
get
that
it.
we can get it internationally. I think sometimes, I know that, well, they've done it for staff, I can say, because I've requested some books that have come all the way from Germany. For example, I was requesting very niche reference work, and like 3 months later, I thought that they just hadn't been able to get it. And 3 months later, one of the members of our interlibrary loan is like, "Hi, I got the book for you." I'm like, "What book?" They're like, "The book you requested. We had to get it from Berlin." It's like, "Oh, but you didn't have to do that." Like, that's so nice. But we do work with people to get the materials that
I
they
had
need.
very good experience with the Johnson County Library.
Yes.
They do a lot of international borrowing, and I didn't know that.
Yes.
But they can get you amazing stuff.
They
Not
really
in
can.
science particularly, but in every field.
That is good to know, because if our digitization and interlibrary loan people have questions, it's good to know that Johnson County is maintaining a good international program. So yeah, I mean, I think that they do, and we loan a lot of materials internationally, so I assume it's reciprocated. Yes.
Well, as you know that we are a retiree association,
Yes.
and many of them, I'm sure, have got collections of book in our own private library or whatever. And we are trying to figure out what to do with
Yes.
it. Now, if we think that some of the proceedings of the conferences or whatever, some books might be useful in your collection, what advice would you give? Bring it or in your list or what?
Yes, so my colleague Sophia Hahn is our collections librarian. She's the one who oversees all possible gifts in kind. I'd be happy to send any of you that are interested her contact information. What we ask is don't show up with unannounced, please. We do ask for a list. That doesn't need to be a super detailed list. We ask for a list of all the materials you think you'd be interested in, with title, author, and year. So pretty straightforward. And then what we go through on our end and do is we check that list that you've sent against the catalog. So first we say, are these materials that are within scope at all? If someone says, "Hello, I'd like to give you my collection on Roman history," we're like, "Thank you very much. However, that is out of scope for us at the present moment. We'd advise these other organizations." But if you say, "I've got scientific journals, for example, would you be interested?" Maybe. Send us a list, we'll work through, we'll compare it with the catalog. and we sometimes will accept, for example, we have an incomplete run, and we say, if you're okay with it, we can't take your full run, but we'll take volumes, 2, 3, 5, 12, and 14. And we often fill holes in our collection this way. So yeah, I mean, we accept. We've accepted hundreds of volumes from people. We've accepted 2 volumes from people. It really ranges. We'll accept any size as long as people are able to provide us a list. Absolutely, yes.
Do you have special sources of support for the rare books collection, or how do you get your support?
We do. So most of our support is part of the original 6 million trust. That's where our operating budget comes for rare books. We are fortunate that we have a few specific people that support our work through our foundation, through donations. Oftentimes people do come to the library and say, like, I'm really interested in supporting the work that you do. Can you earmark this for the rare book collection? And it can be a bit difficult for financial reasons, but we always appreciate the support that people are able to give. And I mean, another support that doesn't always get talked about is just showing up and coming to stuff. So you all are supporting the library, and it's really great to feel that.
What do you think?
Please.
What do you think is the intrinsic value of Linda Hall?
Okay. Whew, I haven't had enough coffee for this. In an increasingly digital age, the assumption is that something that's on the internet is going to stay on the internet. But the truth is, most books that were published in the past have been lost. No copies survive. In my work, I often use reference sources that will say, for example, a 1732 edition of this text is recorded in the catalog of a manor library. No copies are known to survive. Multiply that by hundreds of thousands of books. Books and knowledge and materials are preserved intentionally, sometimes unintentionally, but for the bulk of it, it's preserved intentionally by the work of, in large part, librarians, curators, people that are doing that work, and especially for science and technology, where having a sense of what's come before you is really, really important, so that on a practical level, you're not duplicating experiments, and on a more intellectual level, you're learning from history and from the past. A library like Linda Hall, I think, is invaluable. Don't quote me on that. I'm glad I got that on recording, because I don't remember what I just said. But no, I think we do really important work, and an illustration of the impermanence of digital collections. I mean, physical collections too, but we recently learned that a journal publisher had quite suddenly gone out of business. This was, I believe, a Japanese language engineering publication. The publisher very quickly went out of business, and they were the ones that maintained digital access to their back catalog of materials. Many libraries throughout the country had digital subscriptions to the catalog, and because they had a digital subscription, the heads of library had said, well, what are we keeping all these old paper volumes around for? We learned that this company had gone out of business because over the weekend we received 1,500 interlibrary loan requests for materials from those journals, because we discovered we are the only library in the US that still holds physical copies. And so it's the digital, especially, a publisher can't take back a physical book in the same way that a digital copy can just disappear overnight. And that's often the work that you don't see if you walk into the reading room. You're like, oh, there's some people in here, there's some books out, but in the basement, someone is furiously filling 1,000 requests for a journal that we now are the only place that you can get.
This is the oldest book, sorry, year-wise.
Year-wise, 1472. We have 2 books from 1472. One is Pliny's Natural History. The other is A History of the Roman Empire, which is not within scope, but if a donor says, I'll give you a lot of money and also this book from 1472, you say, thank you very much. Thank you very much. We will take that. Yes.
Yes. Last year or 2 years ago, when we went to visit your collection, I was there and I found a book on astronomy by Paisano, Galileo Galilei, And what it was very interesting that there were some typos in the book, and he made corrections
Yes.
with his hand.
Yes.
And that, well, now my question is, do you give some kind of visibility to tell people about these details, because I think they are very important, because
Yes.
I was here and I found the book by pure chance, but the people should know about that.
Yes. Are you thinking of? I'm gonna do a little. Are you thinking of our copy of Siderius? Because we have copies with Galileo's annotations in them. These are very well documented, and this was on display in the new acquisitions show. So yeah, I mean, we try and spread the word, but it can be something I struggle with in going to museums or writing my own exhibition labels. Is the things that I'm interested in and the things that we're interested in are not necessarily going to grab the general public. I don't understand why. I think it's fascinating that Galileo wrote in this book. I think it's fascinating that there's typos that are corrected in this particular way, but people will walk by it and be like, that's not shiny. I'm like, what are you doing? But we try and actually for this particular one, let me see. If you're interested, if anyone else is interested more in hearing more about this particular book, my colleague Jason Dean wrote an entire post about all of the versions of this book. Here, let's see. Here's one of the corrections that Galileo did in his own hand. It's an important one. He had, I will say,
he wrote down.
part of the problem in this book is that Galileo, from the time he started writing it to the time it got fully printed, was about 2.5 months, because he was writing it as the printer printed it. He wanted to get his discoveries out there very fast, and so I'm sure that someone has done more research on whether or not it was the printer's fault or Galileo's fault. Oftentimes when there are errors, it's the printer's fault because they didn't put the letters in right, they weren't reading the manuscript well enough. Something tells me some of these were Galileo, like misconjugating his Latin or writing diameters when he meant like radii, semi-diameters. One of the best ones is this book was written to tempt, in part, to ask the Medicis for funding, for money. It's like, please. The joke doesn't land quite as it usually does, but I say this is his NEH application. And he had misspelled, he had misconjugated. He had said Medicea, and it should be Medicei. And whoops! Don't do that if you want money from them. Yeah, grammatical error. These are really fascinating books. And a thing that, speaking of recataloging and updating records that were made decades ago, it is very common that I will go and pull a book off the shelf. Actually, wait, let's see if I can. You're going to get a very speedy. Oops. So usually my autocorrect, just as soon as I type cat, it knows that I want to go to the catalog. Let's see if I spelled that correctly. Might be this one. Yes, so I pulled this one. Yes, I pulled this one off the shelf while we were doing an inventory of the Rare Book Vault. The original record was very brief. It just said, this is a copy of 5 books of Euclid, and Viviani is the one who compiled it. Viviani, a student of Galileo, was the one who compiled it. And I opened up the book. So here you're seeing a bit of what the scan looks like. And I was like, okay, there's some writing in it. That's pretty common. Come on, Science of Proportions. That is 50s handwriting. Very nice. Wait, what's this? To the illustrious, I can't remember what exactly it is. I did translate this. And then I said, wait a second. What's that? Is this a dedication copy from Viviani to someone? And he emails Nick Wilding, who's a scholar of Galileo, who's worked to actually uncover forgeries. And he sent us back, classic scholar also, classic academic, where this could have been one email, but instead he was like on his phone, and so it was 5 emails, where he was like, oh, interesting, let me look. And then like 5 minutes later, it was like, I think it is, let me check. And then 2 minutes after that, it was like, that's definitely Viviani. And then right after that, it was a link to another digitized manuscript that has his hand. And he said, yeah, this is definitely a dedication copy from Viviani. And so I went through then and did a more fulsome description where I added all of these. For example, I added something that links, I know this is very small, let's see if I can zoom. I added in this information that says it was printed by this particular printer in Florence. I added in tags that let people search by inscriptions. It's a presentation inscription, so it's Viviani. We're adding all this information about it. I then added a note that says it has, Linda Hall copy has an inscription on the title page by Viviani, inscribing the book to the Tuscan Secretary of State. There it is. Handwriting match confirmed via correspondence with Nick Wilding, June 2024. So a not uncommon thing in my work is I'm like, I'm just going to scan this shelf of books in, and then 4 days later, I've like recatalogued every single one of them. This is not sustainable. I shouldn't do this, but I see handwriting and I'm so tempted. I want to make it accessible to researchers. Yeah.
This is amazing how the past is biting into the present and project itself into the future. This is very interesting.
Yeah.
When you see something like that, there is a dialogue between the past, the present, and
Yes.
the future.
Yes.
There you have a proof, an evidence
Yes.
of what we can do with that. This is really something alive, still alive.
Very much still alive. No, and I think to the question about AI, I mean, this is the power of digital technologies in libraries, is that you can add all of this information in a way, and that information then can get processed in really new and interesting ways.
But you don't see any threat of technology?
Oh, I see a massive threat of technology. Yeah, no, absolutely. The threat I see is not in the technology, but in the people that are making it. So it's for me, it's not. The technology presents amazing opportunities. I just want to make sure that the right person who understands what we want to do with it is the one who's
It's
doing
not
it.
going to replace, books are not being replaced.
I don't think it's going. I mean, I think they're going to try. I think they're always going to try. I think they're always going to say, industrialists, the Elon Musks of the world are always going to be like, let's just burn the past and put these messy books back in the past. This is not the future.
And the next day they want to have them back.
And the next day they're like, actually, we'd like to rehire you. But no, I mean, technology is fascinating for this. It's just a question of who's. That's my 2 cents, at least. I'm not an expert.
It's reassuring.
And I think libraries also in the last maybe 50 years or so have seen waves of this is the technology of the future. This is going to be the innovation that changes fundamentally how we do library services. First, it was like photofax. No one's going to come in and see physical books anymore. They're just going to get the whole book faxed to them. And then it was microfilm. We're going to put everything on microfilm, and it's never going to degrade. And the film definitely is not going to smell like vinegar 20 years later. And this is going to be how we can throw away all the old books because it's all going to be on microfilm. Books are still there. And now it's like, if we just digitize everything, then we can get rid of all the old books. And I'm like, we've heard this before. So I'm hopeful that the books will remain. The books will remain. Yes?
Even with the digitization of all the stuff,
Yeah.
when you go researching for something and you go and have physical contact
Yes.
with that stuff in the library, thank God for libraries.
Yeah.
You even find that there are so many libraries across this country. My wife and I doing genealogy research recently. We're in Pennsylvania, in a little tiny library in a little tiny town that we were having to scroll through microfilm and then ask them about some newspapers, and they literally went into their basement and brought up the
here you go.
paper newspapers.
Yeah.
So the value is unbelievable for keeping it. And, even though you can digitize everything and EMP takes everything out, you can't see anything.
Yeah.
The physical resource is
Yeah.
always the best.
I often, I feel fortunate when I get to consult a physical copy of the book. If it's a book that we don't have, often I'm relying on, okay, let's see if I can get this train right. I'm relying on a compressed PDF posted on another library's website, which is great. I'm glad they have the PDF. that PDF is scanned from a microfilm of the book, and that microfilm is scanned from like a photocopy of the, and so I'm sitting there at my computer like, I think that's the same letter, like I can't tell anything. And there's also a lot of information about the books that is not, you know, a digitization is, I say, like a complement to the physical book. Something like this, just because I have this up, this Galileo is fascinating because this copy in particular has evidence that it was folded to be sent via diplomatic mail. So this, you can't see it because there's lines over it, but if you look at the physical book, the scan doesn't show it. If you look at the physical book in the right kind of light, you can see that there are places where this copy was folded up to send to someone, and that's a story that, you know, you need the physical object, and the physical object in this case is evidence of the sort of history of this copy and why we think it might be so important. Once again, Galileo, that's not right. Anyway, thank you very much, and please continue to ask me questions. I'll send you
Very
all
nice.